High Mediator Kulmin floated peacefully in the massive crystal chamber, his see-through body glowing softly with old wisdom. The Zephyrian Council had ruled 47 star systems for 3,000 years without a single war. They solved every problem through quiet meditation and careful talking. Violence was something they had completely forgotten about. The chamber was so quiet you could hear the gentle humming of the crystal walls. Kulmin and the other council members spent their days in deep thought, managing their peaceful empire. Through mental connection alone. Their bodies were more energy than flesh, evolved beyond the need for physical conflict. They believed they had reached the highest level of civilization possible. This perfect silence suddenly exploded when Scout Velnara crashed through the chamber doors. Her usually calm face showed pure panic. She had never looked so upset in her 500 years of life. The other council members turned to stare at her, their glowing forms pulsing with surprise. "High Mediator," she gasped, struggling to catch her breath. "We have discovered a new species on the outer edge of our territory. They call themselves humans." Kulmin's peaceful expression immediately changed. His ethereal features became hard, and serious as holographic screens appeared around the chamber. The data Velnara brought made every council member gasp in horror. The screens showed endless scenes of destruction. Humans fighting with crude metal weapons that shot pieces of metal at high speed. Cities burning, massive explosions that could destroy entire continents. But the most shocking thing was that humans didn't just fight other species. They fought each other constantly. "Look at this," Velnara said, her voice shaking. "They have something called world wars, where their entire planet fights itself. They've had hundreds of these conflicts. They actually seem to enjoy it." The council watched in disgust as human armies marched across battlefields, their faces showing excitement instead of fear. These creatures treated warfare like some kind of game. They had weapons that could destroy planets, yet they kept making more of them. "Their expansion pattern makes no sense," another council member whispered. "They don't negotiate or mediate. They just take what they want by force." Kulmin studied the data more carefully. Human space was growing rapidly, spreading like a disease across the galaxy. Wherever they went, conflict followed. They had already absorbed 12 smaller species, not through peaceful integration, but through something they called conquest. "This is worse than barbarism," Kulmin declared, his voice echoing through the crystal chamber. "This is a cancer that will destroy everything we have built. Our perfect peace, our harmonious civilization. All of it will be lost if these humans continue to spread." The assembled council members nodded in agreement. They had spent 3 millennia creating a galaxy where disputes were settled through meditation and compromise. The idea of beings who solved problems through violence was terrifying to them. "We who have perfected the art of peace cannot allow such chaos to infect our galaxy," Kulmin continued. "We must act now, before it's too late. Prepare the war. Fleets." The word war felt strange and uncomfortable on his tongue. It was a concept so ancient that most Zephyrians had forgotten it even existed. But sometimes, Kulmin thought, violence was the only way to preserve peace. Ambassador Doyun sat in his worn leather chair aboard Terra Station, reading the most ridiculous document he had ever seen in his 30 years of diplomatic service. The Zephyrian declaration of war was written in such fancy, flowery language that it sounded more like a poetry contest entry than a military threat. The old ambassador's weathered face, marked by decades of tough negotiations and interstellar politics, slowly creased into deep lines as he tried to process what he was reading. Around the oval conference table, 12 of humanity's top military and diplomatic officials waited in complete silence. The only sound was the gentle humming of the space station's life support systems. For exactly 3 seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody even breathed. Then Captain Min Ho, a grizzled veteran who had fought pirates in the Outer Rim for 20 years, let out a small chuckle. It started quietly, just a tiny sound escaping from his throat. Lieutenant Yunji, sitting across from him, tried to hold back a snort, but failed completely. The sound was like a dam breaking. Within moments, the entire conference room exploded. In the loudest laughter Terra Station had heard in years. Hardened military officers were doubled over, clutching their stomachs. Diplomatic advisors were wiping tears from their eyes. Even the usually serious protocol droids seemed to be vibrating with mechanical amusement. Wait, let me get this straight, Duyun wheezed between gasps for air. These aliens think this is war? They're declaring war on us? On humans? He held up the fancy document like it was a joke gift. They've had peace for 3,000 years, which means they've never actually fought anyone in their entire civilization. The laughter got even louder. Captain Minho was banging his fist on the table, tears streaming down his scarred face. 3,000 years of peace, he shouted. We can't go 3,000 minutes without someone starting a fight somewhere. Duyun stood up and walked to the communication console, still chuckling as he activated the broadcast system. His voice would now reach every human colony, space station, and ship across their territory. Attention, citizens of human space, he announced, trying to keep his voice steady but failing as more chuckles escaped. We have just received a formal declaration of war from a species called the Zephyrians. Now here's the funny part. They've maintained perfect peace for 3,000 years. I repeat, they have never fought anyone, ever, not once. The response was immediate and overwhelming. From the mining colonies on Luna to the frontier settlements on the outer rim, human laughter echoed across space. Communication channels lit up with jokes, memes, and commentary that spread faster than light speed. News: meditation warriors coming to get us, someone posted on the networks. Hide your weapons, they might get scared, added another. The meme generators that humans loved so much went into overdrive, creating thousands of jokes about peaceful invaders and the galaxy's most non-threatening threat. Back in the conference room, Military Commander Haiwan had pulled up the tactical displays, her grin so wide it looked like it might split her face in half. The holographic screens showed human military positions, weapon stockpiles, and fleet. Deployments across dozens of star systems. Well, boys and girls, she said, gesturing to the impressive array of military might at their disposal, looks like we're about to give these peaceful aliens a crash course in Human History 101. Should we start with the ancient wars or jump straight to the modern stuff? The room erupted in laughter again. This was going to be interesting. The Zephyrian war fleet dropped out of hyperspace like a perfect work of art. Dozens of crystalline ships arranged themselves in flawless geometric patterns that looked more like a museum display than a military formation. Each vessel gleamed like a precious gem, their surfaces reflecting starlight in beautiful rainbow colors. The formation was so precise that every ship was exactly the same distance from its neighbors, creating perfect triangles and squares that had been used in Zephyrian ceremonies for hundreds of years. High Admiral Tairim stood on the bridge of the mining station New Busan, watching this spectacular light show through the main viewport. He was not an impressive sight. A middle-aged man with 3 days of stubble, wearing a stained work uniform that had seen better decades. His station wasn't much better. New Busan was essentially a floating junkyard with engines, built from salvaged parts and held together with determination and creative welding. Incoming transmission, reported Communications Officer Su Bin, a young woman who had learned her job by fixing broken radios in the outer colonies. They're demanding our immediate surrender. Very politely, I might add. They said please and thank you. Tairim scratched his stubbled chin and looked around his bridge crew. What he saw was typical of human frontier operations, a collection of misfits who had ended up here because they couldn't fit in anywhere else. There was Jinwoo, the chief engineer who used to blow up asteroids for mining companies. Kyung-soo, the weapons officer who had been a pirate before deciding that honest work paid better. Mi-sun, the pilot who had learned to fly by stealing ships from her ex-boyfriend. These weren't professional soldiers with fancy uniforms and military training. They were people who had been fighting for survival since the day they were born. Fighting pirates, fighting corporate security, fighting each other, fighting the universe itself, just to make a living in the harsh frontier of space. Tell them. We're too busy, Tairim replied casually, like he was declining an invitation to dinner. We've got work to do. Around him, the bridge crew exchanged amused glances. The idea of surrendering to anyone, especially beings who had never fought a real battle, was so ridiculous that nobody even considered it seriously. Jin Woo, Tairim continued, Aren't we expecting that asteroid shipment from the mining operation? Engineer. Jin Woo's face lit up with a wicked grin that would have made a pirate proud. Sure are, boss. Big chunk of iron ore coming in fast from the belt. Must weigh about 50,000 tons. Pity if it got misdirected toward those pretty crystal ships, Tayrim said thoughtfully. Accidents happen all the time in space. The Zephyrians were still floating in their perfect formation, waiting for the humans to surrender like civilized beings. They had never imagined that anyone would refuse their polite demands. In their 3,000 years of peace, every dispute had been settled through calm discussion and mutual agreement. What they got instead was a masterclass in human improvisation. Crude mining vessels that looked like flying scrap heaps suddenly swarmed around their beautiful fleet like angry wasps attacking a picnic. The humans used everything they had: mining lasers, cargo containers, construction equipment, even garbage disposals, as weapons. The Zephyrians watched in shock as their pristine formations crumbled under the assault of weaponized mining equipment, and accidentally launched cargo containers full of industrial waste. Their perfect geometric patterns became chaos as crystal ships tried to dodge chunks of metal flying at them from every direction. For the first time in 3,000 years, Zephyrian blood was spilled in anger. Admiral Yejin Rodriguez stood in the command center of the human battleship Defiance, studying the three-dimensional holographic battle map that floated in front of her. Her mixed Korean-Hispanic heritage was typical of humanity's blended nature, a species that had learned to combine the best of all cultures into something uniquely their own. She had earned her nickname the Reaper during the Pirate Wars, where her unconventional tactics had turned certain defeat into crushing victory more times than anyone could count. The holographic display showed the Zephyrian fleet advancing toward human positions with mathematical precision. Every ship was exactly where it should be according to their ancient military textbooks. Their formations were perfect, their movements coordinated, their approach completely predictable. They fight like they're performing a dance, observed Tactical Officer Seong Ho, shaking his head in amazement. Same patterns, same responses every single time. It's like they're following a recipe from a cookbook. Yejin watched the alien fleet maintain their perfect triangular formations, each ship moving in harmony with the others. It was beautiful to watch, like a ballet performed in space. But to her experienced eye, it was also completely useless in real combat. Look at this, she said, pointing to the display. They've been using the same attack patterns for thousands of years. No innovation, no adaptation, no surprises. They approach from the front, fire their weapons in sequence, then retreat to regroup. It's like fighting a computer program. Around the command center, her officers nodded in agreement. These were people who had learned warfare in the brutal school of human conflict, where survival meant constant adaptation and creative thinking. They had fought pirates who changed tactics mid-battle, rebels who used every dirty trick in the book, and corporate security forces who had unlimited resources but no imagination. Then let's teach them some new dance steps, Yejin smiled coldly. Hyun-soo, deploy the Chaos Protocol. Captain Hyun-soo's destroyer squadron immediately scattered, in what looked like complete panic. To the Zephyrians, it appeared that the human ships were fleeing in terror, abandoning all formation and running in random directions. This was exactly what the aliens expected from these primitive beings. But what happened next broke every rule of warfare that the Zephyrians had ever learned. Some human ships pretended to have engine failures, drifting helplessly while broadcasting distress signals. Others appeared to flee toward the outer system, their crews supposedly abandoning their posts. A few ships even seemed to lose control completely, spinning wildly through space. The Zephyrians fell for every trick. They moved to capture the disabled ships, chased the fleeing vessels, and tried to help the out-of-control ones. Their perfect formations broke apart as individual ships left their assigned positions to deal with what they thought were easy targets. That's when the humans struck back with devastating effect. The disabled ships suddenly came to life, their hidden weapon systems tearing into the Zephyrian vessels at point-blank range. The fleeing ships reversed course and attacked from behind. The out-of-control ships revealed that their spinning had been deliberate, allowing them to fire in all directions at once. But the real shock came when several human cargo haulers simply rammed Zephyrian ships at full speed, their crews laughing over the communication channels as they turned their vessels into guided missiles. Mining ships revealed hidden weapon modifications, using industrial lasers to slice through crystal hulls like butter. The Zephyrians, trained in honorable combat for millennia, had no response to humans who used garbage scows as attack vessels and turned ice haulers into ship killers. Their beautiful crystal formations became death traps, as human forces attacked from angles that should have been impossible, according to every military manual ever written. In the aftermath, captured Zephyrian officers stared in complete bewilderment at their human captors. These beings actually laughed as they fought, treated warfare like an entertaining game, and seemed genuinely happy to be in mortal danger. It was beyond their understanding. Military historian Dr. Jae Sung sat comfortably in the simple metal chair of the interrogation room aboard the human cruiser Soul's Pride. Across from him, behind a transparent energy barrier, sat the most confused alien he had ever encountered. Commander Velnara's crystalline form was slowly losing its bright glow, dimming like a light bulb running out of power. Between them on the plain metal table lay a single thick book with worn edges and coffee stains on the cover. The title read, "A Concise History of Human Warfare," in simple black letters. It looked innocent enough, but to the Zephyrian commander, it might as well have been a horror novel. "This cannot be accurate," Velnara whispered, her voice barely audible through the translation device. Her usually bright crystal body had turned an alarming shade of pale blue. No intelligent species could survive such constant violence and still call themselves civilized. Dr. Jae Sung, a cheerful man in his 50s who taught military history at the Human Colonial University, opened the book to a completely random page. He had been studying human conflict for 30 years, and every page held stories that amazed even him. "Let's see what we have here," he said casually, like he was reading the weather report. World War II lasted 6 years. Approximately 60 million people died. We had another world war just 27 years before that one, which killed about 20 million more. Oh, and during the Second World War, we invented nuclear weapons capable of destroying entire cities. The alien's crystalline form flickered with what could only be described as pure terror. "Your species fought 2 wars that killed 80 million of your own kind, within 30 years of each other. Those were just the big ones," Jae Sung replied with a friendly smile. "We call them world wars because they involved most of our planet. But we've had thousands of smaller wars running constantly. Sometimes we fight over territory, sometimes over resources, sometimes over ideas, and sometimes just because we don't like each other very much." Velnara's color was draining away like water from a broken container. "Your species has been fighting for how long exactly?" "Continuously," Jae Sung answered cheerfully, like he was discussing his favorite hobby. "Let me think. We've had maybe 300 years of total peace scattered throughout our entire recorded history. That's about 300 peaceful years out of 7,000 years of recorded civilization. The rest has been constant warfare in one form or another." He started counting on his fingers. "We've had regular wars, civil wars, revolutionary wars, border conflicts, trade wars, cold wars, proxy wars, guerrilla wars, cyber wars, economic wars, and something we call police actions, which are basically wars that we pretend aren't wars." The Zephyrian commander's form was now almost completely transparent. "This is impossible. How did your species survive? How did you develop advanced technology? How did you build a civilization?" "We got really good at fighting while building things at the same time," Jae Sung explained. "Some of our greatest technological advances came from trying to kill each other more efficiently. We invented computers to help us aim weapons better. We developed space travel partly to build better missiles. We created the internet, so our military could communicate during nuclear attacks." Velnara was silent for a long moment, processing this information. Finally, she whispered, "What have we done?" Dr. Jae Sung closed the book and leaned back in his chair. "You've picked a fight with a species that considers warfare a recreational activity," he said with genuine sympathy. "We have professional soldiers who have never experienced a single day of peace in their entire careers. We have weapons designed by people who grew up in active war zones. We have military tactics that have been tested and refined through 7,000 years of humans trying to kill other humans. The Zephyrian Commander began to understand the true magnitude of their civilization's miscalculation. They had declared war on a species for whom war was not an exception, but the normal state of existence. Chief Engineer Mi Young stood in the middle of what used to be a perfectly organized cargo bay aboard the human battlecruiser Incheon Thunder. Now it looked like a tornado had hit an electronics store. Half-built devices covered every surface, tangled wires hung from the ceiling like jungle vines, and the smell of burning circuits filled the air. She had been working for 18 hours straight, fueled by nothing but coffee and the pure excitement of turning everyday objects into weapons of war. The war had only been going on for 3 months, but human innovation had exploded like a firecracker. Factory. When humans were threatened, their natural response wasn't just to fight back, it was to invent completely new ways to fight back, using whatever they had lying around. "Status report," called General Dong-hyun as he stepped carefully through the cluttered doorway, trying not to trip over the cables and spare parts scattered across the floor. Mi Young looked up from a device that appeared to be made from a microwave, oven and a ship's navigation computer. Her hair was sticking up in all directions, and her work uniform was covered in grease stains and scorch marks. "We've successfully weaponized 17 different civilian technologies in just the past week," she reported proudly, gesturing at the organized chaos around her. "Those gravity manipulators that we use to move cargo containers, we can now use them to crush enemy ships like tin cans. The particle accelerators from our research stations make excellent ship-to-ship weapons, and you're going to love this. We figured out how to turn our food production systems into biological warfare dispensers." She pointed to a corner where several hydroponic farming units had been modified, with additional tubes and tanks. "We can grow aggressive bacteria that eats through Zephyrian crystal hulls. Turns out their beautiful ships are basically fancy glass, and we can make stuff that dissolves glass really fast." Lieutenant Sang-wook, a young engineer who had been working on communication systems, held up a device that looked exactly like the coffee makers used in the ship's cafeteria, except for the extra antennas and blinking lights attached to it. "This little beauty can completely overload Zephyrian neural networks," he announced, with the pride of someone who had just solved world hunger. "We discovered that their brains are extremely sensitive to what they call chaotic audio patterns. So we broadcast Earth's top 40 music hits at them through modified communication arrays." General Dong-hyun stared at the coffee maker weapon in disbelief. "Are you telling me that we can disable enemy ships by playing pop music at them?" "It gets better," Sang-wook grinned. "Heavy metal works even faster. Apparently, electric guitars cause them physical pain. Rock and roll makes them pass out completely." Mi Young jumped up excitedly, nearly knocking over a prototype that looked suspiciously like a toaster with rocket engines attached. "Don't forget about the weaponized memes. The Psychological Warfare Division has been having incredible success, broadcasting human comedy shows to Zephyrian fleets." She pulled up a data screen showing the results. "Something about our sense of humor completely disrupts their meditation techniques. They spend thousands of years learning to maintain perfect mental balance, and then we show them a comedian talking about everyday life and their entire philosophy falls apart." "So let me get this straight," General Dong-hyun said slowly, shaking his head in amazement. "We're winning an interstellar war using pop music, repurposed farm equipment, and comedy shows? Plus weaponized household appliances," added Lieutenant Sang-wook helpfully. "We turned vacuum cleaners into shipboarding equipment and dishwashers into communication jammers." Meanwhile, the Zephyrians, who had spent centuries carefully perfecting their advanced technology through meditation and precise engineering, watched in complete horror as humans developed counterweapons in mere weeks that surpassed their millennia of careful advancement. Their beautiful, sophisticated weapons were being defeated by modified kitchen appliances and Earth's greatest hits collection. High Mediator Kyul-min floated through the ancient corridors of the Zephyrian homeworld, descending deeper into the planet's core than any living being had ventured in 3,000 years. The passages grew darker and colder as he moved away from the peaceful meditation chambers above, toward archives that had been deliberately sealed and forgotten. These were the forbidden levels, the places where his people had buried their shameful past. The crystalline walls here were different, rougher, darker, covered with symbols that modern Zephyrians couldn't even read. The very air felt heavy with secrets that had been locked away for millennia. His translucent form pulsed with nervous energy as he approached the main archive chamber. The massive door hadn't been opened since the Great Meditation began, when his ancestors had decided to forget everything about their violent history. Kulmin placed his ethereal hand on the ancient scanner, and the door slowly creaked open. With a sound like breaking glass, inside thousands of data crystals flickered to life, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The information they contained was horrifying. Battle reports, weapon designs, tactical manuals, and historical records that revealed the truth his people had chosen to forget. The ancient Zephyrians had been warriors, not just soldiers, but brutal, efficient, terrifying warriors who had conquered entire star systems through sheer violence. They had been innovators of destruction, creating weapons so powerful that they could crack planets in half. They had fought with a joy and enthusiasm that made human warfare look like a children's game. The records showed battles that lasted for centuries, wars that consumed entire civilizations, and conflicts so savage that they had nearly destroyed all life in their region of the galaxy. The Zephyrians had been the terror of the cosmos, a species so devoted to warfare that they had turned killing into an art form. But then something had changed. The final records showed a civilization that had grown sick of its own violence. After nearly destroying themselves in a war that had lasted for 500 years, the surviving Zephyrians had made a desperate choice. They had used their advanced technology to suppress their own warrior instincts, choosing meditation and peace over the endless cycle of destruction. The Great Meditation hadn't been enlightenment, it had been exhaustion. They had chosen peace, not from wisdom, but from the pure horror of what they had become. They had buried their violent past so deeply that even they had forgotten it existed. Now, watching the battle reports from the human front lines, Kulmin felt a chill of recognition. Humans fought with the same joy, the same terrible innovation, the same relentless drive that had once characterized his own ancestors. They treated warfare like entertainment, developed new weapons from household items, and seemed to thrive. On the chaos of battle, they were what the Zephyrians used to be. "Commander Velnara," he transmitted urgently to their front lines, his voice filled with panic. "Recall all forces immediately. We must end this conflict before we remember what we used to be." But even as he spoke, Kulmin could see that it was already too late. The younger Zephyrian warriors, their peaceful meditation shattered by exposure to human brutality, were beginning to feel something their species hadn't experienced in 3,000 years. The ancient stirrings of bloodlust were awakening. Reports were coming in from across the fleet. Young soldiers were abandoning their meditation practices, developing new weapons on their own, and showing enthusiasm for combat that terrified their commanders. The peaceful civilization that had taken millennia to build was cracking like thin ice, revealing the predators that had always lurked beneath the surface. The war with humans wasn't just threatening to destroy the Zephyrians, it was threatening to turn them back into the monsters they had once been. Captain So Young moved silently through the most sacred place in Zephyrian civilization, her combat boots making no sound on the crystal floors. The meditation chambers of their homeworld were unlike anything humans had ever seen. Massive crystalline spires that stretched up into the clouds, humming with the combined mental energy of billions of peaceful beings. The entire planet was essentially one giant temple, where every Zephyrian spent their lives in constant meditation, desperately trying to maintain the peaceful nature that had kept their violent past buried for 3,000 years. The air itself seemed to vibrate with their collective consciousness, a low harmonic sound that would have been beautiful if it wasn't so obviously strained. Behind So Young, her 5-person infiltration team moved like ghosts through the sacred halls. These weren't the kind of soldiers you'd see in recruitment posters. They were specialists in getting into places they weren't supposed to be and doing things that technically weren't supposed to be possible. Corporal Jun Ho had been a cat burglar before joining the military. Sergeant Hye Jin was an expert in alien psychology. Private Wu Jin could pick locks that didn't even use physical keys. They had penetrated the most secure location in Zephyrian space, not through overwhelming firepower or advanced technology, but through pure human stubbornness and the kind of creative thinking that came from growing up in a species that treated impossible problems as interesting challenges. "Target acquired," whispered Corporal Jun-Ho, pointing toward the center of the main chamber. High Mediator Kulmin floated in the exact middle of the vast room, his translucent form pulsing with visible strain. Around him, thousands of other Zephyrians sat in perfect meditation circles, their combined willpower focused on a single desperate goal, preventing their entire species from remembering how to be warriors. The meditation wasn't working very well. Even from a distance, the humans could see cracks in the Zephyrians' peaceful facade. Some of the younger aliens were twitching, their crystal forms flickering between calm blue and agitated red. The collective harmony was breaking down as the ancient warrior instincts fought to break free. So Young's team expected her to pull out some advanced human weapon or deploy a sophisticated battle plan. Instead, she did something that no military academy in the galaxy would have taught. She walked straight into the middle of the meditation chamber and announced herself. "High Mediator Kiul Min," she called out in a clear, confident voice that echoed through the crystal halls. "I challenge you to single combat." The effect was immediate and dramatic. Every Zephyrian in the chamber stopped meditating and turned to stare at her. The humming sound that had filled the air cut off like someone had flipped a switch. The silence was so complete that you could have heard a pin drop from orbit. The very concept was so completely absurd that it broke something fundamental in the Zephyrian collective psyche. Here were warrior monks who had spent millennia perfecting the art of peaceful meditation, being challenged to honorable battle by a grinning human who clearly treated warfare like some kind of entertaining sport. "You wish to duel?" Kulmin asked slowly, his form stabilizing with sudden clarity as he focused on this impossible situation. "Winner takes all," So Young replied with the kind of casual confidence that only humans seem to possess. "But we fight human style. No ancient rules, no honor codes, no predetermined outcomes based on thousand-year-old traditions. Just you, me, and whoever's left standing when the dust settles." For the first time in 3,000 years, a Zephyrian laughed. It started as a small sound from somewhere in the meditation circles, then spread like wildfire through the chamber. It was a sound of madness and recognition, the laughter of a species suddenly rediscovering what they had tried so desperately hard to forget. The duel between Captain So Young and High Mediator Kulmin lasted exactly 17 minutes and became the most watched event in galactic history. It wasn't a battle between advanced technologies or ancient mystical powers. It was a fight between someone who had spent 3,000 years learning to avoid violence and someone who had spent her entire life mastering it. Kulmin fought with the awakening instincts of his warrior ancestors, his crystalline form shifting and changing as dormant combat abilities flickered back to life. For brief moments, he moved with the deadly grace that had once made his species the terror of the galaxy. His attacks were powerful and precise, drawing on fighting techniques that were older than human civilization. But Captain So Young fought with something the ancient Zephyrians had never possessed: the experience of someone who had learned to survive in a universe where violence was a daily reality. She didn't rely on perfect techniques or honorable combat forms. She used every dirty trick, every improvised weapon, every psychological advantage that 40 years of human warfare had taught her. When the dust settled, High Mediator Kulmin found himself pinned beneath So Young's combat boot, looking up at the business end of her sidearm, pointed directly at his crystalline core. Around them, thousands of Zephyrians watched in complete silence, waiting to see if their spiritual leader would be executed by these violent aliens. But instead of pulling the trigger, Captain So Young did something that changed the course of galactic history. She began to laugh. It started as a small chuckle, then grew into the kind of deep, genuine laughter that only humans seemed capable of producing in the middle of serious situations. The sound echoed through the meditation chamber like music, joined by the chuckles of her infiltration squad, then spreading to the bewildered mirth of the watching Zephyrians. Soon the entire sacred chamber was filled with laughter, something that hadn't happened there in 3,000 years. "You know what the funny thing is?" So Young said, holstering her weapon and extending her hand to help Kyul Min to his feet. "We don't enjoy war because we're monsters or because we like hurting people. We laugh at it because we've survived it so many times that fear doesn't work on us anymore." She pulled the alien leader upright with surprising gentleness. "You chose peace because you were terrified of what you might become if you kept fighting. We chose to become exactly that, and managed to stay human anyway." Kyul Min's crystalline form began to brighten with sudden understanding. The strain that had been visible in his features for months finally began to fade. "You have mastered warfare so completely that it no longer masters you." "Exactly." So Young grinned, the same expression she wore when explaining something obvious to a slow student. "We've been fighting for so long that we've learned how to do it without losing our souls. War is just another tool for us, like a hammer or a computer, useful when you need it, but it doesn't define who we are." She gestured around the meditation chamber, where Zephyrians and humans were now talking together instead of fighting. "Now want to help us keep the peace. Turns out the galaxy needs some people who are crazy enough to fight, so that everyone else doesn't have to." The alliance that formed that day became legendary. The Galactic Council's new motto, carved in EE. Both Zephyrian crystal script and human text on every space station and government building read, "Never interrupt 3,000 years of peace unless you're prepared for 3,000 years of war." And humans think that's funny. The partnership between the species who had perfected peace and the species who had perfected war became the foundation of galactic stability for the next 1,000 years. And every time a new threat emerged, the galaxy's response was the same. Send in the humans, who would laugh in the face of danger and somehow make everything work out in the end.